In the heart of a sleepy valley, beneath a cloak of stars, stood a weathered farmhouse, its white paint peeling like old memories. The smell of rich earth mingled with the crisp mountain air, a home built on the back of hard labor. Inside, the farmer, a man named John, settled at the kitchen table, his calloused hands wrapped around a cup of steaming coffee. The shadows danced on the walls, and for a moment the world outside felt like a distant dream. But the tranquility of that night was about to shatter. Three figures emerged from the darkened trees bordering the farm. They called themselves outlaws, men who walked the line between danger and chaos. They were notorious, skilled at making fear their companion, wielding their cruel intentions like weapons. This night their target was John. They believed they could take what they wanted without consequence, that the lonely farmer would tremble in their presence. As they approached, the moon cast a silvery glow, illuminating the outlines of the men. Tall, ragged coats flapped in the night wind, their faces half hidden by shadow and malice. They snickered among themselves, feeding off the adrenaline coursing through their veins, convinced that their swagger was enough to intimidate. "Let's teach this farmer a lesson," one of them hissed, a glint of wildness flashing in his eyes. Inside the farmhouse, John felt a shift in the air, the stillness around him thickening like fog. He set down his coffee, his instincts whispering that trouble was brewing. A shadow moved across the window, a figure, hunched and ready to pounce. But John wasn't the type to cower. He stood tall, chest broadening, his farmer's spirit ignited by an ancient fire. Without hesitation, he opened the door, the creaking of wood echoing like a thunderclap in the night. With resolve etched on his brow, he stepped outside, each crunch of gravel underfoot matching his steady heartbeat. The three men froze, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. John's voice rang with authority, steady and firm like the earth beneath his boots. The outlaws exchanged dubious glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They had expected the farmer to quiver, to beg, but he stood resolute, a figure of defiance against the brewing storm. "Your land, your livestock," one of them said, a hint of bravado returning to his tone. Laughter rippled through the group, a malignant wave of confidence. But John's eyes narrowed, fierce as a hawk. Behind him, the faint glimmer of a lantern illuminated the farmhouse, casting a warm glow that only deepened the darkness surrounding the outlaws. "This is my home, and I won't let you take anything from me," he declared, words heavy with the weight of sacrifice and struggle, a testament to generations before him. Fury brews in the outlaws. They drew closer, every step a threat, fingers twitching nervously around weapons hidden beneath their shabby coats. One snarled, the bravado flickering now, a candle struggling against a gust of wind. But John wouldn't back down. He had seen too much, fought too hard for what he cherished. He took a step forward, unflinching. "You underestimate me," he said, voice low and steady. The outlaws hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. They had envisioned a simple intimidation tactic, but this farmer spoke of heart, a deep-rooted conviction that no amount of fear could shake. The grip on their weapons slackened, uncertainty creeping in like the shadows of a gathering storm. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. They lunged at John, a reckless attack fueled by desperation. But he had prepared for a moment like this. With a swift movement, he sidestepped, drawing from his experience, the wisdom of the earth guiding his actions. He spun around, catching one of the outlaws off guard, the momentum sending the man sprawling onto the ground. The sound of hard earth meeting unruly flesh echoed through the night sky, a clash of wills shaking the valley. The remaining outlaws froze, a new fear bathing the scene in tension. They had underestimated the farmer. They had thought him just a laborer. But as John stood over the fallen man, defiance radiating from him like light through dark clouds, it became clear. This was a man standing against the tide of fear. John's voice was calm but unwavering, like the mountains standing sentry around his home. The remaining outlaws exchanged glances, their bravado crumbling in the face of raw determination. But desperation breeds foolishness, and they charged forward, emboldened by rage and panic. John, however, was ready. He had a plan. With a swift motion, he reached for a nearby shovel, the tool heavy with possibility. He swung it with precision, focused not on violence but on protecting what was his. The blade caught the light as it swung through the air, a flash of silver and hope. He struck just enough to send the nearest outlaw tumbling backward, his yelp echoing through the night. But the tide was turning. The dance of chaos had begun, and in that moment John was no longer just a farmer. He was a guardian, defending not only his land but the very essence of resilience sewn into the fabric of his being. With each defensive maneuver, a flicker of inspiration sparked within him. He thought of the crops he nurtured, the harvests he had bled for. He thought of the warmth of his home, the laughter of family echoing in the corridors. He fought not just for himself, but for every soul who had ever stood against oppression. The outlaws, now disarrayed and panicked, began to falter. One by one they hesitated, their bravado dissolving into fear. They had come expecting an easy victory but were met with a force of nature they could not comprehend. "Leave!" John bellowed, the words roaring like thunder above the chaos. The sound reverberated, saturating the night air with primal energy, igniting something even deeper within the outlaws. Their eyes widened at the ferocity in his voice, and they glanced at one another. The spark of fear turned into a blazing flame, compelling them to retreat. Suddenly, like water breaking through a dam, they turned and fled into the night, their dark figures swallowed by the woods that had hidden them only moments earlier. The echoes of their footfalls faded, leaving only the resonance of John's heart pounding in the silence. In that moment of victory, John stood alone beneath the vast expanse of stars, feeling the weight of the night settle around him like a comforting embrace. He had fought back and won, not just a battle, but a war against fear itself. But the true battle lay ahead. Though the outlaws had retreated, the landscape of the world doesn't shift overnight. John knew he would remain vigilant. He would protect his home with the ferocity of 1,000 storms. Beneath the stars, he set the shovel down, breathing in the air once more. The next day he gathered the neighbors, those in the valley who had often felt the chill of lawlessness creep near their fields. United, they created a network of trust, a bond fortified through shared hardships, each of them vowing to protect their land and each other. As they worked together, the community thrived. The soil yielded to their efforts, the light pouring through the clouds illuminating their collective spirit. They fortified fields, built fences, and stood as a wall against any threat that crossed their threshold. The outlaws had tried to instill fear, but their attempts only sparked the fire of resilience within this small farming community. In the seasons that followed, stories of John's bravery echoed far and wide, turning into legend. The tale of the farmer who stood against outlaws became a beacon, a reminder that even the quietest voice can roar when the time demands it. John often shared his story by the fire, his voice gravelly with years but lined with pride. He spoke not of violence but of courage, not of fear but of togetherness. He taught those who gathered that true power lies in community, in standing shoulder to shoulder, a united front against any who dared to threaten their way of life. Over time, the faces of those outlaws began to fade into memories as myths of courage grew stronger. The valley flourished, a sanctuary for those who sought solace, and a band of guardians who would not allow fear to claim their home again. Years later, when John's own children grew, they listened intently to the stories, their eyes wide with wonder and admiration. They learned that even in the darkest of nights, one could stand out against the tide of fear. They too would inherit the spirit rooted in the land, tracing their fingers through the soil that had been defended with unyielding strength. The legend of the farmer would be immortalized, not merely in tales passed down generations, but in every seed planted, every crop harvested, and every heartbeat of the community that stood strong against adversity. Because in that valley, under those same stars, one man's bravery had fought back not just against outlaws, but against the very idea that fear could ever truly rule the heart of a home. It was a quiet dusk, the sun slipping behind the distant hills, painting the sky with tones of blood orange and deepening indigo. In that moment, you could almost hear nature whispering secrets, but the peace was about to be shattered. On a small farm nestled in a valley, an aged barn stood sentinel over rows of crops swaying gently in the breeze. Here lived a farmer named Hank, a man whose hands tell tales of hard labor, strength, and the relentless pursuit of survival. He loved this land, not just as a piece of property, but as a part of himself. But for all its beauty, darkness was creeping its way into his earnest life. It started with rumor snippets of conversations filled with fearful whispers. Outlaws had roamed into the territory, robbing local farms, terrorizing families, and leaving behind a trail of destruction. Those men were known for their violence, their ruthless nature forged through years of survival outside the law. They thought they could scare people into submission. They believed that a hardened farmer like Hank would just back down. But they'd soon learn that this man, aged and weather-beaten as he was, had something far more potent than fear. He had grit. One evening, as the sun bid farewell to another day, three figures emerged from the shadows of the forest bordering Hank's farm. Their silhouettes were sharp against the twilight, stepping with a swagger that screamed arrogance. That quiet night turned electric with tension, the wind holding its breath, sensing the impending clash. One of them shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. The leader, a burly man with a wicked scar curling across his cheek, brandished a knife that glinted ominously in the fading light. Hank stood on his porch, the wind tousling his hair, eyes narrowing at the approaching outlaws. He could see their confidence, but he wouldn't let it intimidate him. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, a mountain of resolve standing against a storm. "Not a chance. This land feeds my family. You won't just take it from me," he replied, his voice steady and firm as the earth beneath his feet. Laughter erupted from the outlaws, cruel and mocking. "What are you going to do, farmer? Swing your pitchfork at us?" The leader took a step forward, puffing up his chest, ready to make a move, thinking fear would dictate the outcome. But Hank remembered the sweat and blisters from a long season of work in the fields. He remembered the kindness of neighbors lending a hand, and the laughter shared over dinner after a long day. This was his home, not just a piece of land, and he'd be damned if he let anyone take it from him without a fight. With a surge of adrenaline, Hank grabbed a nearby shovel from the porch, its wooden handle worn but familiar in his grip. He lifted it high, ready to defend what was rightfully his. "You think you can scare me?" His voice echoed with a courage that seemed to merge with the very earth itself. The outlaws hesitated, eyes momentarily widening in surprise at the sight of the defiant farmer. For a brief, fragile moment, doubt crept in as they took in the strength of Hank's stance. But like a breath suddenly released, fight or flight surged through them and they charged forward in a chaotic rush, all bravado and fury. Hank didn't flinch. He swung the shovel, connecting with the nearest outlaw's leg, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The unexpectedness of the blow caught the other two off guard, their bravado melting in an instant. The leader shouted, scrambling for his footing. But Hank wasn't just a farmer. He was a protector of his land, and he moved with a determination born from deep roots. Adrenaline coursed through him. Every swing of that shovel spoke of years spent working the soil, raising crops and mending fences. With every precise motion, he struck with the force of a man unyielding, embodying the spirit of every farmer who ever toiled under the sun. The outlaws, now confronted with a fierce resistance they hadn't anticipated, faltered. Hank's strength radiated like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, igniting something in his soul that pushed away the fears. It became clear that this wasn't merely a nasty confrontation. This was a fight for livelihood, a clash of wills that brought forth a primal instinct to defend. "Back off!" Hank roared, heart pounding like war drums. The outlaws' confidence shattered like glass. They began to scatter, fear overtaking the front of bravado they had worn so well. Hank's resolve had become a beacon, an unyielding flame that ignited his purpose. He chased one man into the field, each step a battle cry, sheer determination propelling him forward. The man stumbled, his feet tangling in the overgrown weeds, and sank into the soil. "No!" he cried, desperation dripping from his voice as he turned to face Hank, who stood over him, shovel poised, power radiating from every muscle. "You chose the wrong path," Hank said, voice steady like the mountains in the distance. With one last desperate look, the outlaw scrambled away into the night, leaving his friends to flee in their own panic. The other two dashed, dodging the darkness, hearts racing with both fear and the bitter taste of defeat. Just like that, A showdown became a fight for survival as Hank reclaimed his ground. As the dust settled and the echoes of chaos faded into the distance, Hank stood alone beneath the vast night sky, breathing in the cool, crisp air. The stars twinkled brightly above, almost as if they were nodding in approval. The fight had been fierce and intense, yet he felt a sense of victory swelling in his chest, a testament that courage can stand tall against fear. But the battle was not just his own. It resonated with every farmer and laborer, every person who has ever had to stand up against adversity. Hank knew that the outlaws would come back, emboldened by their initial failures, seeking revenge. But instead of succumbing to apprehension, he decided to gather the community together. In the days that followed, neighbors arrived, curious about the recent altercation. Over cups of coffee and shared stories, amid the warmth of friendship, Hank recounted the tale, his voice passionate and engaging as he painted the vivid picture of that fateful night. The gathering united into an oasis of strength, a coalition of farmers determined to protect their land. They shared their own near misses and experiences, weaving a tapestry of resilience and fortitude under the very stars that had bore witness to Hank's battle. Together, they began to devise plans to fortify their homesteads. Fences went up, eyes sharpened, and patrols began. The outlaws were no longer faceless shadows lurking in the distance. They had become tangible threats, but no less daunting to a united front. With each passing day, Hank and the community grew stronger. They worked together in the fields, harvesting crops and sharing laughter, the bonds of camaraderie sealing their resolve. They found joy in the simple act of labor, hands meeting earth while hearts intertwined in purpose. Then came the day when the outlaws returned, drawn by the scent of vulnerability, thinking they could sneak back into the valley with little resistance. They underestimated the spirit of the united farmers. As shadows crept back into the valley late one dusky evening, a rustle broke the calm. Hank stood at the forefront, farmers flanking him on either side, shoulders squared and chests out in unified strength. The sight was enough to send a shiver down the spines of the outlaws. This was not the weary farmer they had encountered before. "Leave!" Hank shouted, a thunderous roar echoing through the stillness, fueled by the strength of his neighbors. Each man stood behind him, shoulders braced, faces fierce. The outlaws stumbled, surprise flooding their eyes as they realized they were not facing a solitary figure, but an army of resolve forged from shared hardships. They hadn't come here for a simple steal. They had ignited a fire that blazed far brighter than their own. One outlaw, the same one with the wicked scar, glared defiantly, attempting to regain his bravado, but something had shifted. The strength emanating from Hank and his neighbors was visceral, almost a tangible force that pushed back against the tide of fear. He barked, dropping all pretense of bravado. They were no longer in control. They were outmanned, outmatched, and trapped in a web they had woven themselves. And in that moment of tension, Hank took a step forward, his eyes piercing, holding the leader's gaze. "You've made your choice. Now feel the consequences," he said, every word heavy with meaning, echoing the truth of unity. The outlaws turned to flee, the darkness swallowing them whole, the sound of their footfalls receding into the night. In that moment, the valley erupted with cheers, voices lifting into the air like the petals of a blooming flower. Together, they had triumphed. It wasn't just Hank standing against the outlaws. It was a community, an intertwined fate that fought for its right to exist, to thrive, to nourish the land passed down through generations. From that day forward, Hank wasn't just a farmer. He became a symbol of resilience for the valley. The legend spread, stories whispered from ear to ear, carrying in its wake the lesson that fear could be faced with strength, and that unity sparkled brighter than any weapon ever could. As the sun dipped below the hills and lit the sky afire with its farewell, Hank looked up at the stars, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. He had fought not just for his land, but for everything it represented: family, community, and the warrior spirit that lives in us all. The outlaws had thought they could scare the farmer, but they had awakened a force that would never be subdued. And that was a lesson worth passing down for generations to come. The moon hung high in the ink-black sky, casting a silver glow over the sprawling farmland. Crickets sang their nightly song, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree that stood proudly by the farmhouse. Inside, a single lantern flickered, illuminating a weathered table where Farmer Tom sat, writing in a journal, his rough hands moving slowly over the paper. Peace surrounded him, the kind that comes only when day is done, and yet, somewhere not far off, trouble was brewing. For weeks, rumors had spread through the nearby town. A gang of outlaws was making their way through the region, robbing farmers and terrorizing families. These men were not ordinary thieves. They were feral souls, unruly and cruel, thinking they could simply take what they wanted without restraint. They cast shadows that lingered far beyond their presence, sowing fear in the hearts of hard-working folks. Tom remembered growing up in these fields, wide-eyed and filled with dreams. He had nurtured crops from seed to harvest, his sweat mingling with the earth, creating a bond deeper than blood, a bond that urged him to defend what was his. He had heard the warnings, had felt that creeping sense of dread, but he also felt something else, determination. As the night deepened, the air thickened with tension. A light crunch echoed in the gravel outside, drawing Tom's attention. He pushed open the door, the familiar creak punctuating the stillness. Stepping into the night, he scanned the horizon. At first, nothing appeared amiss. But then he saw them, three dark figures slinking towards his barn, the outlines of men cloaked in the fabric of naughtiness and malice. One of them called out, his voice dripping with mockery. Tom's pulse quickened, but his face remained steady. It wasn't just about the land, it was about the principles that had shaped his life. He would not back down. "You want my crops?" he shouted back, surprising even himself. His voice rang clear into the night, strong and defiant. The biggest outlaw laughed, shaking his head as if Tom were a joke. "You think you can scare us with your bravado, farmer?" That very moment, a spark ignited within Tom. He had tilled this land for years, fought against droughts and storms, and he would not let a pack of thugs take his dignity or harvest. He stepped forward, the lantern light catching the fire in his eyes. No man is more powerful than his own land. The tension hung in the air like a taut string, vibrating with the weight of their standoff. Just when Tom thought they'd back off, the leader lunged forward, knife glinting under the moon's gaze. Tom had only a moment to react. With an instinct sharper than his fear, he grabbed the wooden shovel leaning against the barn, wielding it like a sword. The outlaw, stunned by Tom's determination, hesitated. That gave Tom the opening he needed. With a swift, calculated swing, he brought the shovel crashing down, missing the outlaw by inches. But that wasn't the aim. The loud thud against the ground startled the gang, and their bravado began to crumble. The leader shouted, but the hesitation in his voice was clear. He wasn't just facing a farmer. He was facing a man whose roots stretched deep into the earth, a man who had seen the worst of storms and still stood tall. Tom moved closer, stepping into the fray as adrenaline coursed through him. "You want my land. You want my crops." His voice boomed. The remaining outlaws exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. They were used to easy target squabbling neighbors without the will to stand against them. But this farmer wasn't like the rest. Tom wasn't just an old man wielding a shovel, he was a guardian of his land. As if sensing their leader's faltering confidence, Tom took another step forward, shovel in hand. "I won't back down." With a sudden ferocity, the leader charged at Tom, knife pointed like the claws of a predator. But Tom was quick, sidestepping and bringing the shovel down hard on the ground again. This time the earth trembled beneath the blade, sending vibrations of power through the night. The outlaws stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief. They had come to cause fear, to instill terror, not realizing that the heart of the farmer ran deeper than the soil he tilled. Tom lunged, shoving the shovel towards the leader, who barely dove out of the way, hitting the ground with a thud. Now the outlaws were panicking. They fanned out, not sure how to regain control over the situation. Tom stood grounded, energy radiating from him like the sun. His heart roared in his chest. He was a force fighting for a purpose, every swing of the shovel cutting through doubt and fears. He yelled, his voice as solid as the mountains standing guard around them. The leader, scrambling to regain his footing, shot out a challenge. "You think you can scare us off with your little farm tricks?" But even he could feel the tide turning. The more Tom pressed forward, the more that bravado dissolved. With renewed purpose, the gang began to backtrack, uncertainty creeping into their minds like the cold wind. They had come expecting a shivering, cowering farmer, not one who stood resolutely against them, a protector unwilling to bow to fear. Then in a moment infused with desperation, the leader shouted, "This isn't over." He stumbled over his own feet, the fear palpable in his eyes as he rushed back with the others into the shadows from which they had crawled. As the echoes of their flight faded, Tom stood alone, panting and trembling. The adrenaline ebbed away, leaving him both exhilarated and exhausted. He had fought back, defended his land, and that truth shimmered in the cool night air. Days passed, and the incident lingered like an unwelcome ghost. The outlaws were still out there, no less dangerous, but now they knew they had miscalculated. In the days that followed, Tom gathered his community together, sharing his story not just to rally them, but to embolden their spirits. At twilight, he recounted the confrontation by the barn, each word galvanizing the farmers who listened, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns around them. "We need to stand together," he told them, the fire in his chest igniting theirs. Farmers nodded, and soon they began forming a plan. They would patrol the fields, set up defenses, and watch each other's backs. The valley would not become a sanctuary for fear, but the outlaws did not go quietly. They lingered on the edges, plotting amidst the trees, wondering how they could reclaim their power over the land. They underestimated the bond that grew among the farming families, a connection tightened by shared purpose and hard work. Then one fateful evening the outlaws returned, emboldened by desperation and recklessness. Underneath a blanket of stars, they crept back to Tom's farm, thinking they could catch him unawares. But Tom was prepared, the whispers of the wind bringing him news long before their approach. He stood on his porch, shovel in hand, flanked by neighbors who looked just as fierce. The sight was a thick wall of resistance, casting shadows that merged into one formidable figure. Tom shouted into the encroaching dark, voice steady, unyielding as the land he nourished. The leader of the gang, caught off guard by the unity of the farmers, hesitated. He bellowed, but even they could sense the ebb of confidence. They were no longer facing an isolated farmer but a formidable band, a community grounded in history and strength. As the outlaws moved forward, it became clear that this time they would not find the easy victory they sought. Tom led the charge, swinging his shovel with precision. The farmers joined him, a chorus of courage echoing in the face of danger. Each swing resonated across the valley, a powerful reminder that together they were stronger. With every forward motion, the tide turned. The outlaws faltered, confusion turning into horror as their bravado began to crack. They were met with tools turned into weapons, with every farmer wielding not only their harvests but their spirit. "For our land," Tom roared, and the chorus grew louder, a roaring tempest rising up around them. The outlaws turned to flee, terror painted across their once overconfident faces. As they sprinted into the night, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration coursed through the farmers. They had stood together against fear and triumphed. The sun rose the next day, spilling golden light over the valley, illuminating a place changed forever. Tom looked around. His neighbors stood beside him with faces radiant in victory. They had not just defended their land, they had resurrected a spirit that would continue to flourish. Word of their unity spread quickly. The tale of Farmer Tom and the outlaws became folklore, a testament to defiance and strength, whispering through the fields. Soon, stories turned into lessons of courage, teaching children the value of standing up for what is right. In the years that followed, a festival emerged, celebrating not only the harvest but the unity forged in the fire of adversity. Tom, now older but still untamed in spirit, reflected upon those dark nights, grateful for the bond that strengthened the community around him. The outlaws had thought they could scare the farmer, but they had awakened a force that could never be quelled. And that truth became the foundation of new generations who learned that standing together, they could face any storm, overcome any darkness, and forever protect the heart of their land, their home. The wind howled through the fields, sending waves of grass dancing like ghosts under the pale moonlight. In the heart of the valley, A lone farmhouse stood a weathered monument to hard work and perseverance. Inside, Farmer Sam sat by the warm glow of an oil lamp, scribbling notes in a weathered journal. Outside, darkness crept close, casting shadows that seemed to whisper danger. For weeks, fear had hung in the air like a thick fog. Stories had circulated of a gang of outlaws, a ruthless crew rumored to be roaming the countryside. These men were not just petty thieves, they were legends of fear known for robbing farms, striking terror into the hearts of ordinary people. They thought they could scare anyone who stood in their way. But they hadn't met Sam yet. As Sam dipped his pen, a sharp noise shattered the calm. It was a sound that sent a chill racing up his spine, a low, rumbling laughter, followed by the crunch of gravel just outside his home. A knot tightened in his stomach. He set the pen down and slowly rose, perceiving a darkness lurking beyond the flimsy wooden door. Peering through the window, his heart sank. 3 figures swaggered toward his barn, their silhouettes illuminated by the dim light of the lanterns hanging from the farmhouse porch. Each man wore a crooked grin, the kind that told stories of mischief and malice. Sam's mind raced. He could feel their intentions like a cold weight pressing against his chest. One of the men bellowed, his laughter echoing into the night. Sam's heart pounded against his ribcage. He had spent years toiling in these fields, pouring his soul into this land, and the thought of these thugs taking it all away boiled his blood. This was his home, built from sweat and sacrifice. With a deep breath, he stepped out onto the porch, squared his shoulders, and planted his feet firmly in the soil. "You boys best turn around. This is my land, and I won't let you take what's mine," he shouted, his voice steady despite the tempest swirling inside him. The outlaws halted, momentarily surprised. They had come expecting a frightened farmer, not this unwavering figure standing guard over his livelihood. The leader, a burly man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, took a step forward. "What's an old man like you going to do?" Sam's grip tightened. A pitchfork would hardly serve him now, but he had something else: courage. "You've got no business here." The gang erupted into laughter, a sharp, derisive sound that cut through the cool night air. "You think you can scare us off? We've seen worse than you." The guy with the scar flashed his knife, and the others echoed his bravado. But Sam wasn't afraid of knives. He was afraid of losing everything he held dear. That fear ignited a fire within him. "You don't understand. This isn't just a piece of land." With that declaration, he lunged toward the barn, determined to grab his trusty shovel. It may not have been a weapon, but it was a tool that had seen him through countless storms and hardships. If it came down to a fight, he would wield it with the same tenacity he brought to every season. The leader sneered, clearly dismissing him as a threat. But Sam wasn't running, he was preparing. He emerged from the barn, shovel in hand, its wooden handle warm against his palm. The outlaws hesitated, taken aback by this sudden shift. They were conditioned to scare, never to be scared. They shared uneasy glances, their bravado faltering in the face of Sam's fierce determination. Sam yelled, forcing his voice to remain firm. The tension crackled in the night air, filled with the promise of impending confrontation. The gang regained their nerve, emboldened by their numbers, but Sam had something they lacked: heart. With a quick motion, one of the outlaws charged at him, knife drawn. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Sam lifted the shovel, sidestepping the attack and swinging it around in one fluid motion, connecting with the outlaw's shoulder. The man yelped, tumbling to the ground, his bravado shattered alongside his confidence. The remaining 2 exchanged panicked glances, their laughter now replaced by uncertainty. Sam didn't wait for their decision. With adrenaline surging, he advanced, shovel held high like a warrior brandishing a sword. "You want to take from me? Run!" The leader shouted, scrambling backward, tripping over his own feet. The sight of their leader retreating unleashed a tidal wave of fear among the remaining outlaws. They turned and raced into the night, their bravado vanishing like mist in the sunlight. Sam breathed heavily, his chest rising and falling, the thrill of triumph washing over him as he faced the dwindling shadows. He stood there, heart pounding, drenched in sweat but victorious. He had fought back and won. The night felt different now, a sense of power filling the air, underlined by the rustling leaves that seemed to cheer him on. In the days that followed, the story of Sam's bravery spread like wildfire through the valley. Neighbors drew closer, stopping by to share their gratitude and admiration. They'd been living in fear, paralyzed by uncertainty, but witnessing Sam's courage sparked something within them, an awakening. One evening, as friends gathered at his house, Sam recounted the events of the night. "They thought they could intimidate me, but I wasn't about to let anyone take my home," he explained. Inspired by his bravery, the farmers began to form alliances. They banded together, sharing advice on how to fortify their homes, holding meetings to discuss strategies for protection. They set up watchdogs, patrolling their lands at night, and worked together to create a network of solidarity. They were no longer just individual farmers. They were a community, forged from shared purpose and determined to protect their way of life. As the weeks passed, more and more families joined their cause, each person bringing wisdom from their own struggles. They shared stories of resilience, small victories over adversity, and fears still looming like shadows. Sam's victory had unleashed a newfound spirit, one that intimidated the outlaws far more than anything else could. It wasn't long before the outlaws heard about the growing unity among the farmers. They had been humbled by the farmers' resolve, but they were not done. Under the cloak of darkness, they plotted their return. One fateful night they approached the valley once more, emboldened by their desperation. Sam and the others were prepared for them. They stood vigil under the stars, each farmer holding a tool in their hand: shovels, pitchforks, and axes transformed into symbols of resistance. The air buzzed with an electric tension as if even the night itself was holding its breath for what was to come. When the howls of the outlaws pierced the stillness, Sam stepped into the open, voice steady and loud. "You're in the wrong place." The lead outlaw grunted, his earlier bravado gone, replaced with uncertainty. He yelled, though grit barely veiled the tremor in his voice. Sam thundered, and with that the neighboring farmers emerged from the shadows, uniting behind him in a solid wall. Their determination fused them into one unbreakable force. Every single person took a step forward, tools raised high, a sea of resilience ready to meet the impending storm. The outlaws stood frozen, stripped of their confidence, faced with something they hadn't prepared for: unity. The leader took a step back, glancing frantically at his companions, who were no longer men full of bravado but terrified souls standing on the edge of defeat. He shouted, and the outlaws turned tail, fleeing into the darkness, their howls echoing as they disappeared into the night. Triumph erupted among the farmers, a symphony of cheers blending with laughter as they celebrated their victory over fear itself. Sam looked around, pride surging as he gazed at the faces of his friends and neighbors. They had come together as one, a village bound by resilience, courage, and a fierce love for the land they called home. As dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Sam felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had fought back, not just for themselves but for the promise of tomorrow. They had demonstrated that fear could be conquered, and that in unity there was an unshakable strength. From that day on, Farmer Sam was more than just a guardian of the land. He became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, standing together can turn fear into courage and transform a community into a fortress. The legends of that night echoed through the valley for years to come. The outlaws thought they could scare the farmer, but they awakened a legacy of bravery that would live on for generations. And as the seasons passed, that vibrant spirit, forged in the crucible of strife, continued to thrive, reminding everyone that no one, no matter how fierce, could extinguish the fire of determination in the hearts of those who stood united. The night was shrouded in an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl. In the heart of the valley, Farmer Bill stood on his porch, gazing out across the sprawling fields that he had tended for years. The moonlight bathed the land in a soft glow, but an ominous feeling danced in the air, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Word on the wind carried whispers of trouble. A gang of outlaws was terrorizing nearby farms, robbing families under the cover of darkness. Bill felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The outlaws were notorious men who prided themselves on causing fear and chaos, thinking they could take whatever they wanted from people who had worked their entire lives for it. He had heard the stories, tales of men broken down by fear, losing not just their possessions but their very spirit. But Farmer Bill was nothing if not resilient. This land was his life, his livelihood. The sweat he poured into it was woven with love and dedication. He wouldn't let fear dictate his fate. He would defend his home. The night deepened, and then, just as the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole, three figures emerged from the tree line, painted against the moonlit sky. Shadows of mischief and malice, they strode forward, swagger in their stance, confidence glowing in their eyes as if they believed they could take on the world without consequence. The leader called out, a menacing smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "You best lock up." Bill clenched his fists, feeling adrenaline surge through him. "This is my land." His voice rang out like a bell, piercing the stillness, steady and unwavering. The outlaws exchanged incredulous glances. Their laughter, sharp and mocking, hung in the air like a bad omen. The leader sneered, brandishing a knife that glimmered wickedly in the moonlight. The scene played out in slow motion, each heartbeat echoing the courage igniting within Bill. He had labored under the sun and rain, sowed seeds in the soil that bore not just crops but dreams. This was not merely land, it was a part of him. He took a step forward, gaze locked on the leader. With that declaration, Bill reached for an old shovel propped against the porch, its handle worn smooth by years of hard work. The outlaws hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their hearts. They had expected a feeble farmer, not a man grounded by resilience and ready to defend what was rightfully his. "You don't need to do this," the leader said, his bravado faltering. But Bill wasn't about to let fear sway him. He had seen too many years of hard work unravel at the hands of men like these. "I'm not backing down." In those moments, a spark ignited within him, swirling into something far more powerful than fear. The outlaws charged forward, driven by desperation, and in that heartbeat, Bill swung the shovel, connecting with the ground hard enough to send vibrations coursing through the earth. The first outlaw stumbled backward, startled. This farmer meant business. The leader bellowed for them to attack, but they were met with Bill's relentless spirit. He moved quickly, dancing away from the grasp of a flailing arm, and swung the shovel again, striking with purpose not to kill, but to protect. Each motion was fueled by decades of cultivation, transforming fear into an indomitable willpower. The outlaws began to lose their momentum, their jokes faded into gasps. One shouted, realizing they had underestimated him. Bill shouted, heart racing, but even his voice resonated with courage. "You think I'm just some old man? I've fought weather and tried to keep this farm alive." The leader, sensing dread creeping into his own heart, rushed at Bill with renewed aggression. But just as he lunged, Bill sidestepped, swinging the shovel at the man's feet, sending him tumbling into the dirt. The second outlaw tried to dart in from the side, but Bill was already pivoting, shovel poised like a sword. He struck again, catching the man in the gut, sending him sprawling away with a cry that echoed into the night. The two remaining outlaws hesitated, panic flickering in their eyes. It was as if fear had transformed them into children again, confronting a world they didn't understand. They had expected a farmer, yes, but not this unleashed spirit, not this fierce guardian of the earth. "Leave!" Bill hollered, voice booming. The leader scrambled to his feet, eyes wide, realizing the fight was lost. He shouted, turning to flee into the darkness, dragging his companions behind him. Silence fell over the valley like a soft blanket, and the adrenaline began to ebb from Bill's body. It was a surreal moment. He stood there, shovel still clenched in his hand, chest heaving, feeling as if he had been forged anew in that fierce struggle. The battle hadn't just been a defense of his land. It was a testament to his spirit, a fierce refusal to yield to intimidation. Word of the confrontation swept through the valley like a wildfire. Neighbors arrived in droves, eyes wide with admiration. They had heard of Bill's bravery, and it ignited something in them, a flicker of hope against the creeping darkness. People gathered on his porch, sharing tales of their own encounters with fear, realizing they were not alone. "Together we can stand strong," Bill proclaimed, his voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. "They think they can scare us, but we mustn't let them." With those words, a newfound spirit blossomed within the community. Bill's story transformed from a single farmer's fight into a rallying cry mantra, igniting courage throughout the valley. The farmers banded together, pooling resources and devising plans to fortify their homesteads. They shared their tools, sharpened their pitchforks, and assured each other they wouldn't let fear dictate their lives any longer. Patrols were established, turning the fearful nights into watches of solidarity, with laughter mingling with moonlight as they guarded each other's backs. There was a buzz in the air. News spread, not just of the outlaws but of the farmers' resilience. Neighbors became friends, allies forged in the heart of adversity. Bill organized community meetings, inviting everyone to share stories of bravery, resilience, and faith. Each tale was shared as if stitching patches into a quilt of strength, a warm remedy against the chill of fear. Days turned into weeks and seasons shifted in the valley. Spring drew near and with it, hope blossomed anew. The farmers fortified their fields, tending to their crops with care, knowing that no shadow could darken the resilience of their hearts. Confidence flowed through them like a current, clearing the cloudy skies of fear. But the outlaws hadn't forgotten. They were lurking, emboldened by their previous failures, plotting revenge. They believed that the next time they would strike harder, instill deeper fear, and reclaim the power they felt slipping from their grasp. On a night painted black by clouds, the outlaws returned, emboldened by desperation. They crept into the valley, seeking weakness, eyes glinting with misguided resolve. As they approached, they expected to find the farmland once again vulnerable. Yet as they moved closer, they were met with a barricade of resolve. Bill stood at the forefront, flanked by his neighbors, a unified army of determination grounded in the soil they had fought to protect. Each farmer stood tall, shoulders squared, tools ready. Bill shouted, voice booming like thunder. The leader of the outlaws hesitated, uncertainty washing over him. He jeered, but even he could feel the shift in the air. They weren't mere farmers anymore. They had become a force of nature. Seeing the band of brothers and sisters standing together sparked something deeper within the outlaws, a flicker of fear that ignited their instincts to flee before they even attempted a fight. The leader shouted, and the gang turned to sprint back into the shadows, their dark forms swallowed by the night like remnants of fear. Cheers erupted into the air, laughter mingling with cries of triumph. The farmers embraced one another, joy lighting up their faces as they celebrated their victory. Bill looked around, his heart swelling with pride. They had become a community stronger, braver, united not just against the threat of crime, but against fear itself. As dawn broke, streaks of gold painted the sky, illuminating their land like a blessing. The battle wasn't just theirs to win. They had ignited an entire legacy of courage, determination, and resilience that would echo through the valley for generations. Children growing up in this land would hear tales of Farmer Bill and his unwavering spirit, watching as the lessons of bravery were stitched into the fabric of their lives. They would learn that even the fiercest storms could not shake their courage when they stood together, ringing true to the belief that no one could take what they had built with love, and that fear had no place in a united heart. And so, the legend of the farmer and his stand against fear became a vibrant color in the tapestry of the valley's history, a testament that echoes through the ages. Those outlaws had come expecting an easy conquest, but they left with a stark reminder. When a community stands united, courage is more powerful than darkness, and no shadow can ever conquer the heart of a farmer. It was a still night, the kind where the very air seemed to hold its breath. In the small town of Maplewood, shadows cloaked the fields, and the moon cast a silvery sheen over the crooked path leading to Farmer Jake's land. As he sat on his front porch, a cup of coffee warming his hands, the peace felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Rumors had begun to swirl in the town, stories of a vicious gang of outlaws who roamed the region, preying on unsuspecting farmers, stealing livestock, and leaving nothing but fear in their wake. They were an embodiment of chaos, and the thought of them creeping into his world sent a shiver down Jake's spine. He had spent a lifetime working this land, pouring his soul into the soil. No way would he let anyone take that from him. Hearing children laughter from nearby, he thought of those innocent faces, of the families that worked the fields beside him. He couldn't let fear steal their joy. Sliding the cup down on the wooden railing, he rose to his feet, determination sparking within him. If they wanted a fight, he would give it to them. Just then his senses prickled. Two shadows broke away from the tree line that bordered his farm, moving low and stealthy across the grass. He squinted into the dim light, spotting the unmistakable shapes of men, three of them, advancing with cruel confidence. They approached his barn, whispering to one another, their laughter sharp and scornful, drifting through the night. "Old man thinks he owns the place," chuckled one of them, a scruffy figure with a scar running down his cheek. Jake felt something deep within him convulse, a cocktail of anger and adrenaline. He wasn't about to let them desecrate his land. Clutching the edge of the porch, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of hard work settle around him like armor. He shouted, his voice carrying over the field, "You boys need to turn around and leave." They halted, surprise flickering briefly in their eyes, but it was quickly replaced by laughter. The leader taunted. Jake's spine stiffened. He hadn't backed down from storms. He wasn't about to step back from miscreants either. Drawing himself up straight, he stepped off the porch, his heart hammering but his resolve unyielding. He declared, voice steady. With a sudden burst of movement, the biggest outlaw lunged toward him, knife flashing in the moonlight, intent on bringing fear down hard. Jake's instincts kicked in. He sidestepped, grabbing an old shovel that rested against the porch. It was a simple tool, but it was a symbol of every hour spent working the land. As the leader stumbled past him, Jake swung the shovel with all the ferocity of a man defending his home. The blade connected with the ground, sending vibrations through the earth, producing a sound that resounded like thunder in the night. The outlaw tripped, crashing to the ground, confusion blossoming on his face as he struggled to regain composure. The others hesitated, the bravado that once swelled in their chests now shrinking in the face of unexpected resistance. Jake felt powerful, a fire igniting in his chest. He roared, brandishing the shovel like a sword before him. The remaining two outlaws shared a look of disbelief and fear. They were used to easy targets farmers brought to their knees with barely a fight. But now they faced a man with the heart of an unwilling warrior. One shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. Jake didn't wait. He bolted toward them, swinging the shovel in broad arcs. The second outlaw attempted to rush him, but Jake ducked low, pivoted, and swept the boot of his shovel across the ground, catching the man's feet and sending him tumbling, sprawling to the dirt beside his fallen companion. The leader scrambled back, fear overtaking every ounce of bravado he managed to muster. He turned to flee, calling back over his shoulder, "This isn't over." But Jake's resolve was like steel, unyielding. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he raised the shovel high once more, shouting, "You come back." And just as the outlaws fled into the dark woods, the heavy silence returned to the valley. Jake stood there, heart racing, feeling as if every muscle in his body had just regained its purpose. He hadn't just defended his land, he had wrestled with fear and emerged victorious. The dawn brought news of his fight. Word spread like wildfire through the town, bringing farmers flocking to his door, eyes bright with admiration and curiosity. They had been terrorized, cowering in their homes, but witnessing Jake's defiance sparked something deep within their hearts. One neighbor exclaimed, clapping him on the back, a broad smile splitting his face. As the days passed, the energy in Maplewood began to shift. The tales of bravery inspired the townsfolk to come together. They held meetings, discussed fortifications for their farms, and shared their own encounters with fear. Each spoke of times they'd felt bullied, times fear had threatened to darken their world. Jake listened intently, feeling the weight of their stories resonate like drumbeats. He encouraged them to stand up, to not be afraid. "Fear is a choice," he told them one evening by the flickering light of a campfire. "We've fought hard for these lands." With each passing day, more farmers joined his cause. They pooled resources, shared tools, and reviewed strategies to prepare against any further incursions. They became not just neighbors but a tight-knit community, bound by one common cause, the right to cultivate their lives free from fear. Under the astoundingly clear summer sky, something profound happened. Week by week, as they worked side by side to enhance their defenses, laughter and camaraderie filled the air. Families began to thrive again, hearts lifted, stories told under starry nights. And deep underneath it all, shadows of dread began to lift. But trouble does not vanish without intention, and the outlaws were plotting once more. They were emboldened by their initial defeat and sought to create an even more chaotic encounter, thinking they could reclaim control. One warm evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with crimson splashes, they crept back into the valley, armed and ready for revenge. The farmstead landed under moonlight, a beautiful oasis of tranquility, yet fraught with the tension of impending danger. But Jake wasn't afraid. He stood at the forefront with his neighbors, all of them ready to meet the storm. They lined up on the crest of a small hill overlooking the fields, resolute, their faces illuminated by the harvest moon. Jake shouted into the night, "We know you're out there." The outlaws emerged from the trees, emboldened yet blindsided by the strength of unity. They had expected a single farmer, cowering in fear, but instead found a whole community standing tall, ready to defend their ground. The outlaw leader shouted, rushing forward, but it was a rallying call met with the solid ground of resolve. Jake and his neighboring farmers stood firm, tools raised high like shields against the chaos barreling toward them. The first outlaw lunged, but Jake met him head-on, shovel spinning like a windmill on a summer day. The outlaw stumbled, surprise etched on his features as he fell back, confusion taking hold. One after another, as the chaos unfolded, each farmer moved in unison. Jake felt the heart of this newfound bravery beating in rhythm with his own, a pulse igniting a growing fire. The outlaws had tried to cultivate fear, but they faced a storm of courage. The skirmish rose and fell like the tides, with exclamations echoing under the stars as the farmers defended what was theirs, not just land but their pride, their histories, their families. In that tumultuous dance, Bill forgot his fears and drew strength from those beside him. No longer did he swing the shovel just to defend. He swung it for his friends, for their families, and generations yet to come. Each strike resonated with purpose, a powerful reminder that unity brings strength unfathomable. With a final charge, the outlaws began to withdraw, their bluster dissolving into panic. They turned on their heels, scattering into the night like leaves blown away by the wind. Cheers erupted among the farmers. Elation coursed through the air like fireworks on a summer evening as they celebrated their victory. They had faced shadows and come out into the light together, refusing to let fear guide their lives any longer. Bill turned to his neighbors, many of whom wore expressions of disbelief and exhilaration. He yelled, his voice booming with joy, "We are stronger united than divided." In that moment, beneath the vast cosmos, under a blanket of stars, they felt untouchable. Their laughter mingled like threads weaving a vibrant tapestry of triumph. They had fought back against the darkness and emerged shining like the sun. From that day on, the tale of Farmer Jake and his neighbors became legend. Their resistance etched into the hearts of the people of Maplewood, a story endearing and unforgettable. The outlaws never returned. Their attempt at terror had awakened something far more powerful, a surge of courage fueled by community. Fear may come in shadows, but through resilience, hope thrives. In the end, every farmer became a guardian of not just land but spirit. They understood that standing against fear is more powerful than the fear itself, and that together, they could face whatever life threw their way. And so, the fields of Maplewood flourished, not just under the sun, but under the unwavering spirit of those who knew that no one could take away what they had built together. Together, they transformed their world, reminding each other that the heart of a farmer beats ferociously, resilient against all odds. The stillness of the night was broken only by the soft whisper of wind through the tall corn stalks. Beneath the moonlight, Farmer Roy stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, his heart heavy with unease. In the distance, the silhouette of his cornfield against the sky painted a picture of hard work and dedication. But tonight, that picture felt fragile. In recent weeks, rumors had swept through the surrounding towns. Outlaws were roaming the countryside, terrorizing anyone they came across. Just as Roy reached for his old work gloves, a sudden rustling in the bushes caught his attention. He squinted into the dark, the shadows twisting and contorting as the faint sound crept closer. 3 men emerged, flank by flank like dark specters prowling through the night. The leader, with thinned lips and piercing eyes, wore a cruel smile, carrying the unmistakable swagger of someone who had taken what he wanted far too often. He called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Don't you think it's time for you to hand over your crops and livestock?" Roy's heart raced, but he remained steady, hand clenched tight around the porch railing. The laughter of the outlaws burst into the air, harsh and disbelieving. "What's an old man like you going to do?" But something stirred deep inside Roy. He wasn't just an old farmer. He was the culmination of generations who had toiled this soil, each furrow and harvest a testament to resilience. "You don't understand," he said, voice low, eyes narrowing. "I've put my blood, sweat, and tears into this land." In a flash they advanced, the leader lunging forward with a knife glinting wickedly in the moonlight. Adrenaline surged through Roy as he instinctively sidestepped, grabbing an old shovel from beside the porch. It was simply a tool, worn yet reliable, but in that moment it became a beacon of tenacity, an emblem of his unwillingness to surrender. With a swift motion, he swung the shovel, catching the outlaw off guard and forcing him backward. The other two stumbled, their laughter replaced with confusion as Roy's resolve painted a new picture before them. He yelled, and even as he said it, he felt a surge of determination course through him. The leader rallied himself and hurled forward, swinging his knife like a creature possessed. But Roy's instincts were sharp, each movement deliberate, practiced from years of battling nature itself. He ducked, pivoted, and swung the shovel again, making contact with the ground just as the second outlaw charged at him. The sound echoed like thunder, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Roy shouted, garnering every ounce of courage he had. The sheer force of his focus surprised even him. The outlaws faltered, their bravado crumbling in the face of this unexpected resistance. They had anticipated an easy target, the image of a weary old man who would tremble at the sight of them, but they misjudged. Roy was not just a farmer, he was guardian of his land, and every swing spoke of the fierceness embedded in his heart. Roy charged, striking his shovel against the ground again, sending vibrations through the air. The leader, now visibly shaken, rallied his men. "Come on," he barked, desperation edging into his voice. Yet it was too late. Roy was no longer fighting just for himself. He was fighting for the legacy sown into every seed he planted and every crop he harvested. The sound of the shovel smashing into the dirt resonated with every fiber of his being. With each strike, he felt strength swell within him, a wild, primal rage unleashed against those who sought to take his livelihood. The outlaws, sensing defeat, scrambled back, hearts racing. One of them shouted, but their bravado fractured as they turned to flee back into the darkness from which they came, leaving behind nothing but echoes of their shattered confidence. Breathless, Roy stood there for a brief moment, the empty night closing in around him, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a potent mix of exhaustion and triumph in its wake. He had fought, and he had won. As daylight broke the following morning, news of Roy's extraordinary stand spread throughout the valley like wildfire. Neighbors assembled at his doorstep, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and admiration. They had all felt the weight of fear pressing down on their shoulders, but Roy had awakened something within them, a belief that they too could fight back. "Did you see him?" whispered one farmer, disbelief coloring his tone. Encouraged by Roy's defiance, the community gathered to share their stories, recounting their encounters with the outlaws. They gathered in his barn, renewing old friendships and fortifying bonds that had weakened under the weight of dread. Each tale spoken became a thread in the fabric of their collective courage. "Let's band together," Roy proclaimed, his voice firm and resolute as he stood before them. They nodded, energy pulsing through the crowd as they started brainstorming strategies. They pooled resources, shared tools, and planned patrols through the fields. The farmers' camaraderie thickened like the crops they tended, and soon, excitement filled the air. No longer did the dark clouds of fear linger over Maplewood. Instead, they were infused with renewed hope. That very evening, with twinkling stars above, the farmers ambled through the fields, checking stock, laughing, and exchanging cheerful banter. They installed watch posts, reinforcing each other's resolve. The sense of community thrived, breathing life back into their spirits. Underneath the surface of camaraderie, an unsettling tension brewed. The outlaws had not been idle. They were plotting revenge, tightening the grip of rage on their hearts. They would not go quietly into the night. They yearned for retribution and had begun to feel the sting of that shame. Weeks passed, and the aura of determination swelled until a fateful evening brought dark clouds swirling over the valley. Thunder rolled ominously, and a storm brewed on the horizon, mirroring the tension brewing in the hearts of the townsfolk. The farmers gathered once more, this time under the duress of impending confrontation. "I say we be ready for them," Roy urged, his expression stern. The room grew silent, every eye fixed on him, understanding the weight of his words. "We can't let them think they can intimidate us again." Nods of agreement trickled through the crowd, the resolve settling like a heavy fog. As twilight descended, the tension edged into palpable dread. It curled around the townsfolk's hearts, stirring up emotions long buried and forgotten. But Roy felt something different. He felt determination and courage pulsing stronger than ever before. The ominous night grew darker, deeper, until the shadows took tangible forms creeping through the fog. Suddenly, an explosion of raucous laughter shattered the night. A group of silhouettes emerged against the backdrop of the moonlit sky. The outlaws were back, emboldened by anger. They approached with malicious intent, knives glinting under the moonlight, eyes wild with a desperate hunger for retribution. The leader snarled, his voice weaving through the air like venom. Roy felt the blood rush to his head and tried to steady his breathing. It was time. The moment he had prepared for was finally here. He faced his neighbors, determination mingling with fear in their eyes, but he refused to let that fear take hold tonight. "Stay together," he commanded, raising his shovel high like a beacon. They lined up next to him, gripping their tools, ready to defend their home. The collective strength radiated from them, a symphony of courage that would resonate in the hearts of anyone who dared to listen. As the outlaws charged, the wind howled fiercely, the skies rumbling like a hurricane ready to unleash its power. Roy's heart raced, but with every beat came a fierce conviction. He wouldn't let fear dictate their fate. His neighbors surged behind him, ready to bring whatever strength they had against the tide of darkness descending upon them. Roy yelled as tension soared. The air thickened like molasses as the first clash erupted. Tools swung, strength rallied against fear. Adrenaline pulsed, time seemed to stretch and contract in chaotic bursts, as the battle unfolded like an agonizing dance of despair and strength. The leader yelled, swinging wildly, but Roy was ready. He ducked, returning with a swift arc of his shovel. It swept through the air with that familiar weight, meeting flesh with a resounding thud. A sudden flash caught Roy's eye. A second outlaw had sidled in with a knife raised high, his intent crystal clear. Someone shouted, but it was too late. Before Roy could react, pain surged as the knife found its mark, piercing through skin and muscle. He felt fire erupt across his side, a shock of cold horror mingling with the heat of anger that rose unbidden. Darkness threatened to creep in around the edges of his vision as the world spiraled into chaos, the noise of his neighbors battling the outlaws fading into a distant echo. The last thing Roy saw was the unwavering strength of his friends, fighting valiantly around him, refusing to surrender to fear even as he collapsed to the ground. The battle was not over yet, and though the weight of darkness loomed heavy, the spirit of the farmer was only beginning to awaken.